Hello, my name is John. I'm going to be talking about a language exchange project between UTSA and Honduras, which started this past spring. So, as some background, this was a 5-week project that was part of the technology and language teaching class at the master's level. So there were 7 MA TESOL instructors who were paired with 30 students in Honduras. The students in Honduras range from 7th grade, about 11 or 12 years old, to university. And they are divided into 2 groups, roughly beginner and intermediate. There were 2 parts. There were Zoom classes on Saturday, followed during the week with WhatsApp-based cultural activities like videos, making maps, photography, sharing music. So this is not a research presentation. This is a practice presentation. So I'm going to try to tell a story about this collaboration. And a big part of that story is the challenge of trying to teach with WhatsApp when there are very few pedagogical resources available for doing that, and where it's really difficult to make a connection between the class, such as you see on the screen in this image, and working with small groups through an instant messaging platform like WhatsApp. So I'm going to describe this picture a little bit because it's important. This is an actual classroom in Honduras. This is this is both groups meeting together. So there are roughly 25 students in the classroom at this particular moment. And we are presenting from Texas on the screen that you see on the back wall of this classroom. So this is not a Zoom class where each student has their own computer and can interact. So I taught 1 or 2 classes on Saturday morning, and my choice was to interact during the class with WhatsApp. I'm not going to be talking about that so much today, but just to let you know that this was not a conventional Zoom classroom that we had on Saturday mornings. So roughly to tell you what I'm going to be doing, we're going to have a couple of slides where you interact. I want to get a sense of your opinions about using mobile devices, thoughts about the nature of this project and of WhatsApp itself, some reflection on the problems or challenges that we're trying to address in this project, and steps toward making change for the next iteration of this project in spring 2023. So this is your opportunity to answer survey questions. And this is a short answer. So one of the first challenges about doing this work is what to call it. There are a lot of possible terms. There's telecollaboration, there's virtual exchange, there's distance learning, there's language learning beyond the classroom, and on the screen is the phrase that I have settled on for now for talking about what we are doing. We are trying to enhance the learning environment in Honduras through technology-rich second language environment beyond the classroom. And there's another term for this, which is what I have come across in my reading, and that is something called digital wilds. So the idea behind digital wilds is that students in language learning are doing their learning in spaces, communities, and on networks that are not connected to the formal instructional context. Again, I return to this metaphor of this project The Saturday Zoom classes are like the base camp. That's where ideally the training takes place to interact on a day-to-day basis in small groups. And the WhatsApp groups are the forward location where students are on their own. They're not with a teacher. They're just there with their phone. And they have to accomplish some language-related task. A little bit of background about WhatsApp. It's an extremely versatile platform. It was founded in 2009. It was purchased by Facebook and is still owned by Facebook. It was purchased in 2014. According to its own data, there are more than 2 billion users in 180 countries. It's not the only instant messaging platform. There's Facebook messaging, there's iMessage through Apple, there's Viber, there's Line, there's Telegram, and there are others that I don't know about, I'm sure. But the range of uses is interesting. It's been used to write books. It's been used in diplomacy. It's been used in healthcare, international migration, information about routes, and meetup points are shared through WhatsApp. It has been used in political activity, in organizing resistance and protests in Hong Kong. And the example on the screen is from a recent Washington Post article about how WhatsApp was used to organize protest against the Taliban in Afghanistan. So in reading literature about WhatsApp in language learning, there are a range of views, obviously, and I think myself, I have been shifting from a very optimistic view through one doing this project that's a bit more realistic. The optimistic view is that mobile learning is situated learning. Smartphones, and it's kind of ideal in that sense. Smartphones can be carried anywhere, contain global positioning system, GPS, that interacts with one's surroundings, and communication will be, for that reason, bound up with a social context. And the quotation on the screen gives a sense of that optimism. It's also a little bit creepy to me, and that I'm terrified of the day that somebody puts something in my skin that's like a Google or a GPS implant. But this is one perspective. So one of the problems that we're trying to address, and this is something that comes from the organizers of the nonprofit in Honduras with whom we are partnering, and that's that this English training relates specifically to the problem of out-migration that Honduras has. The number on the screen reflects the number of border encounters with Honduran migrants over 4 years. It's an extremely high number, of course, and is high relative to the population of Honduras. Population of Honduras is roughly 9 million. And these contacts represent more than 40% of all contact with people from Central America. There are a lot of factors that push this migration. Fears of assault, food insecurity, income loss. There's been the compounding factors of COVID-19, hurricanes in 2020, and corruption in the country. Within the research literature, there is not many exchanges of this nature that have been studied with countries like Honduras, where there is a lot of out-migration. So for me, it's an interesting question of how does presumably participants in our project in Honduras use WhatsApp to communicate with family members who may have migrated to the United States. So WhatsApp has multiple types of use for the students who are participating with us. And that's not a question that I've answered or asked to this point. The quotation on the screen is one of the organizers of the Honduras effort and expresses why this type of English language learning was chosen. And again, this is sort of the broader problem within which our sort of smaller problems are situated. This is a short outline of the project as it took place over 5 weeks in this past spring. So it was quite simple. It was, if we think about different types of collaboration, intercultural collaboration, it was, you might call it more superficial than others. The topics were quite simple: daily life, key locations, Holy Week, which occurred during the project, and likes and dislikes regarding music, anime figures. I mean, all this type of thing came up. The technologies used, WhatsApp was consistent throughout. There were some others that social media, social networking type projects that were involved. But I think the pedagogical philosophy was task-based. Ideally, and it didn't work perfectly, but each week students were meant to create a video, meant to create a map, meant to create a short documentary in whatever form they chose of life during Holy Week, and to create a playlist of songs. So there were products that they were meant to create. So I'm going to speak a bit about the more micro level of challenges that this project raises. And there's a range of first technical issues that are going to be encountered. Mobile phones in the Honduras context are often shared. Children use their parents' phone. They use their brother's or sister's phone. Phones are on different platforms. This is not a 5G, fifth generation context. They're typically not using their phones on cellular networks. They're using their phones on Wi-Fi. And Wi-Fi goes out when power goes out, which happens quite frequently, as we found out teaching Zoom classes and interacting during the week. A student would come back after a day of absence and say, well, our power was out yesterday. The issues I'm going to focus on more in the next few minutes relate to preparation and training. And when I say preparation and training, I mean both sides. I mean preparing both the instructors at UTSA and the learners themselves, and the nature of participation. Ideally, in these interactions, we're looking for some sort of transformation of participation as social roles and identities in the group evolve over time. And that presents its own challenges. The micro challenges begin. So we're going to look at a series of actual interactions from the WhatsApp exchanges in the spring to identify some of the challenges in the communication. The first is miscommunication and misunderstanding. Parts of most, if not all, international exchanges deal with some kind of misunderstanding. And here is one example of one of the students in Honduras who looked for a machine Google translation of Como Amaneció and came up with the literal rendering of how did it dawn. And this resulted in sort of a teaching moment where the instructor helped lead her through recognition that that was not the right phrase, and there was not enough room on this slide, but later on the instructor helped her with some alternatives in English. How did you sleep? How do you feel this morning? That kind of thing. So miscommunications is one issue, is one challenge. And this is harder to see, but this is an actual screenshot from WhatsApp. And we'll look at some of the participation figures of the various groups. But this group had the least amount of participation, and one possible reason is that the instructors inserted the expectations, the assignment, the task for the week in one long message. And the problem with this is it violates something that called cultures of use. Text messaging programs have a certain culture associated with them. Messages tend to be short. They're not didactic. So this is the challenge of negotiating as an instructor. What's the proper voice for me in relating to these students? And I think one of the problems here is that we're trying to send something that might be in a syllabus and just copy and paste that and put it in WhatsApp. And it doesn't lead to a lot of interaction in the group. And as I said, this group had the least amount of participation just based on the quantity of interaction. It's also the other negative effect of this is it turns WhatsApp into something where you're just fulfilling your obligations. And I had actually to intervene in this group to get students in Honduras to participate. I had to use other channels to communicate with the students to incentivize them to participate. And this is one side of the spectrum. This is in WhatsApp, this is the teacher using a very didactic approach. And the next slide, we're going to look at sort of the opposite approach, which is to engage learners in this daily phatic interchange. We see it here on the screen. How are you? Hi, I'm okay. And you? Hi, how are you? Good, well, and you? And part of facilitating involvement on mobile devices, according to earlier research, is that teachers, facilitators have to accept more personal and direct contact. Phatic communication is part of it. But I think this is also kind of a violation, really, of cultures of use of WhatsApp, because I don't know about you, but typically I don't exchange messages like this on text. Hi, what's up? I don't know. I don't usually tend to do that. The people I'm already in a relationship with, I don't need to say that on a daily basis. So I mentioned about the participation figures of these groups. So these are at the two extremes. And group one, which was the first slide I showed you, the first WhatsApp screenshot I showed you, there were 70 lines in the chat in 5 weeks. They exchanged 16 links or documents or media of some kind. Group 5, which was the second screenshot that I showed, there were 1,427 lines in chat. And this is a challenge for instructors because, as I'll get to in just a minute or so, it's quite a lot of pressure to have to respond. These are examples that I've come up in my feed on Twitter recently that speak about kind of this pressure that WhatsApp can put on a person, that you're accessible 24 hours a day, that you're able to respond. I don't think that that's a healthy approach for using WhatsApp in the project that we're doing with Honduras. And this is the last screenshot that I'll show you of an actual WhatsApp interaction. This is the only case in all of the thousands of lines of WhatsApp chat that resulted from the spring project. This is the only case where two of the participants in Honduras actually interacted with each other. All the other interaction was between teacher and student. So each small WhatsApp group had 5 or 6 Honduran students and one facilitator. All the interaction was facilitator, student, facilitator, student. And I think one of the goals of using WhatsApp is, and what we tried to establish by calling the instructors amigos or buddies, not teachers. We did not refer to them as teachers. We wanted to shift from somebody who's more of an authority figure, an enforcer of standard language ideologies, to someone who's a resource person and who helps bring a community together in this WhatsApp environment. So the collision that we noticed in the interactions on WhatsApp is what one usually anticipates: emoticons, and we did see those stickers being used. But for the most part, the Honduran students were very diligent in adhering to regularities of standard English. They rarely borrowed from Spanish, perceiving perhaps that they were there as language learners. They were meant to show off what they knew in English, and they were meant to do it in a quote-unquote proper way. Or they may be still influenced by the nature of this teacher-student interaction. So I mentioned that dynamics were most part fronted or initiated by the UTSA facilitators. And I'm going to share a couple of comments from the facilitators after the project was over. And they both expressed some frustration about the level of participation in their small groups. So one of the problems was that the UTSA leaders and the Honduran students were positioned on two sides of a cultural divide. And studies of communities of practice, thinking of Lev and Wenger and Norton, non-participation is also a feature of communities of practice. Just because there's a community of practice does not mean that there will be a rise to full participation. This is another UTSA facilitator's comment. a very personal frustration of making an effort to put oneself forward in WhatsApp and not receiving something in response. And this is also relates to that frustration of sort of being caught up every day in this phatic exchange. Hi, how are you? How are you doing? And not really moving beyond, struggling to move beyond that point. So looking towards spring next year, it's clear that teachers and learners both need prompting and training to develop their interactions in WhatsApp. So this is a beginning. This is what I'm starting to put together, prompting cards or recipe cards for how to interact on the field of language learning via WhatsApp. So there are a number of suggested activities that I found and resources that I'm sharing with the UTSA instructors. And this card, for example, is a translation activity in which you type in a message in textese or in shorthand form, and the respondent has to translate that into quote-unquote standard English. You can also do the reverse. You can provide a message in standard English and have them translate it into textese. This one here is for emoji stories. You provide 4 emojis, and the respondent has to respond with a sentence or a story of some kind that incorporates those 4 emojis in some way. There are actually a lot of these activities. There'll probably be about 25 or 30 of these prompting cards. So one thing has become clear, that the UTSA leaders have some guidance toward shaping the interaction so that it falls between the extremes of didactic assignment making and just everyday phatic conversation. The one assumption that I had in starting this project was that the 2 sides, people are familiar with WhatsApp, the interactions will just take care of themselves. Well, that's clearly not true. We need to continue in cooperation with leaders and students in Honduras, building a context-specific style of interaction that helps to build languaging skills and that affirms the goal to teach with care, to go beyond structure and to build on the wider goal of giving these learners incentive to live in and develop Honduras, their homeland. And there's a quote that expresses technology itself is not the answer.